Have you ever wondered why we look up when we speak to God? Why did all ancient civilizations without exception point to the heavens when referring to their deities? What really happened in the early days of humanity that caused completely isolated cultures from opposite corners of the planet to share almost identical stories about the lords who descended from the heavens? Prepare for a journey to humanity's most distant past, where the line between history and myth blurs, where forbidden truths were buried under layers upon layers of religious manipulation. The Dark Lords of Heaven are not merely characters from forgotten legends. They are present in the oldest scriptures, in Sumerian tablets, Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Vedic texts of India, and even in the most obscure passages of the Bible itself, passages that are rarely discussed in modern religious circles. When the Bible mentions the Nephilim, the sons of God who united with the daughters of men, who are we really talking about? When Sumerian texts speak of the Anunnaki, those who came from heaven to earth, who were these entities that brought knowledge, technology, and civilization? The official history, we are told, rarely mentions that before monotheism took hold, before the concept of a single God dominated our spiritual thought, there existed complex deities that did not fit into the simplistic categories of good or evil. The Dark Lords were ambivalent deities, carrying both the potential for creation and destruction, much like the forces of nature they possibly represented, or perhaps controlled. Throughout ancient cultures, from Mesopotamia to the Americas, from Africa to the Far East, there are accounts of beings who came from the heavens, generally described as having dark skin or associated with the darkness of the cosmos. Why this association with the color black? Is it a representation of outer space itself, of the cosmic void from which these deities emerged? Or is there something more literal in these descriptions that has been lost in translation over the millennia? What you're about to discover in this video will challenge everything you thought you knew about religion, spirituality, and the very origins of humanity. We'll delve into the original texts, not translations filtered through centuries of biased theological interpretation. We'll analyze archaeological artifacts that contradict the established narrative. We'll connect the dots between cultures that supposedly never had contact with each other. The deities that preceded the one God were not simply erased from history. They were transformed, reclassified, demonized in some cases, or reduced to angels and messengers in others. The true history of human spirituality is far more complex and fascinating than the simplified version we have inherited. Why did religious elites throughout history fear these primordial deities so much? Why was so much effort invested in replacing this pantheon with a single supreme being? What knowledge, what powers, what truths about our own nature and potential were contained in the traditions of these dark lords of the sky that needed to be suppressed? This is not just a video about ancient history or comparative mythology. It's an investigation into the greatest historical revision ever undertaken, the transition from polytheism to monotheism, and the hidden truths that were buried in that process. If you've ever felt that there's something beyond the official narrative about our spiritual history, that modern religions are just the tip of the iceberg of a much deeper and older knowledge, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel right now. We need to build a community of people who aren't afraid to question, to seek the truth beyond the veil of official history. Share in the comments if you've ever had any intuition or dreams related to these ancient deities, because this journey we're beginning today will completely change your view of our spiritual and cosmic origins. When we talk about the Dark Lords of the sky, we need to start with the very concept of the sky in ancient cultures. For our ancestors, the sky was not just a physical space above our heads, but a completely different realm, inhabited by beings of a nature distinct from our own. The fascinating thing is that civilizations with no contact with each other developed surprisingly similar cosmologies, with deities who descended from the stars to create or shape humanity. In the Sumerian tablets, the oldest known writings of humanity, we find detailed accounts of the Anunnaki, beings described as those who came from heaven to earth. These deities were not presented as ethereal or spiritual beings, but as physical, tangible entities that traveled in celestial boats and established a dwelling on earth to extract resources, mainly gold. The Sumerians, considered the first urban civilization of humanity, attributed all their knowledge, from writing to agriculture, from astronomy to metallurgy, to these beings who descended from the heavens. In ancient Egypt, we find similar narratives. Hieroglyphs speak of the Neteru, the guardians of the sky, deities who came from a specific star, Sirius, and who brought knowledge and civilization. It is interesting to note that many of these Egyptian deities were depicted with black or dark blue skin, symbolizing their cosmic origin, their connection to the night sky. Osiris, one of the main Egyptian deities, was frequently portrayed with black skin, representing his association with rebirth and the cosmos. In the Vedic tradition of India, we find the Devas and the Asuras, celestial beings in constant conflict, but both originating from the stars. Vedic texts, such as the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, contain detailed descriptions of vimanas, flying machines used by the gods to travel between heaven and earth. These are not vague or metaphorical descriptions, but surprisingly precise technical explanations of aircraft, with mentions of specific fuels and propulsion mechanisms. In the Americas, long before the arrival of Europeans, civilizations such as the Maya, Aztec, and Inca maintained traditions about stellar beings who brought knowledge and civilization. The Aztec god Quetzalcoatl, described as a being with different skin who came from the sky and promised to return, is just one example among many. In Africa, various tribes still maintain oral traditions about the children of the stars, dark-skinned beings who descended from the sky to teach humans the secrets of life. What makes these narratives so intriguing is not only their similarity, but the fact that many of them were recorded long before any contact between these civilizations. How can we explain that cultures isolated by oceans and continents developed such similar histories? The conventional answer from anthropologists, that these are coincidences based on similar astronomical observations, seems increasingly insufficient in the face of the specificity and complexity of these narratives. Another fascinating aspect is the recurring association of these deities with the color black. In many traditions, this color did not have negative connotations, but represented the mystery of the cosmos, the primordial void from which all creation emerges. The Black Lords were, in essence, manifestations of the universe itself, entities that inhabited the darkness of space and from there brought light and knowledge to nascent humanity. The oldest traditions often describe these beings as having a physical appearance different from humans, taller, with skin of unusual shades, eyes that shone like the sun or the stars. These descriptions were later reinterpreted as metaphors or symbolism, but what if our ancestors were simply recording what they saw? What if these accounts were literal testimonies of contact with extraterrestrial beings? If you've ever wondered why ancient civilizations possessed such advanced astronomical knowledge, how the Maya were able to accurately calculate the cycles of Venus, or how the Sumerians knew of the existence of planets invisible to the naked eye, perhaps the answer lies in these accounts. Share the word origin in the comments if you believe that our cosmic history may be far more complex than what we are taught in schools. Delving deeper into our exploration, we arrive at the Anunnaki, perhaps the best documented example of the Dark Lords of Heaven. The Sumerian tablets, some dating back over 6,000 years, contain extremely detailed accounts of these beings. The name Anunnaki literally means those who came from heaven to earth, or descendants of An, and being the supreme god associated with the starry sky. What makes the accounts of the Anunnaki so fascinating is the level of detail and pragmatism. They are not described as ethereal or spiritual deities, but as physical beings with motivations, conflicts, and limitations. According to the Sumerian tablets, especially the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, and the Epic of Atrahasis, the Anunnaki came to Earth to extract resources, primarily gold, which was necessary to repair the damaged atmosphere of their home planet, Nibiru. According to the texts, this planet has an extremely elliptical orbit that takes it far beyond Pluto and periodically brings it close to Earth every 3,600 years. During one of these close approaches, the Anunnaki are said to have established bases on Earth, initially in what we now know as the Middle East, particularly in the Mesopotamian region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The texts describe a complex hierarchy among these beings. Led by Anu, the supreme king who resided on Nibiru, the Anunnaki on Earth were commanded by his sons, Enlil, the mission commander, and Enki, the chief scientist and engineer. This division of power generated conflicts that, according to the texts, had a profound impact on the development of humanity. The most controversial story involving the Anunnaki is undoubtedly the creation of humankind. According to the Sumerian tablets, the Anunnaki initially did all the mining work themselves, but eventually rebelled against these conditions. It was then that Enki, along with the goddess Ninmah, also called Ninhursag, proposed creating workers to perform these arduous tasks. These workers were created through a combination of genetic engineering, mixing DNA from the Anunnaki themselves with genetic material from hominids already existing on Earth. This creation narrative presents striking parallels with the biblical account in Genesis, especially if we consider that the Hebrew text uses the term Elohim, a plural word, to refer to the Creator. "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness," the text says, suggesting a plurality of creators, not a single God. Some researchers, such as Zecharia Sitchin, argue that Sumerian paintings and sculptures often depict the Anunnaki as tall beings with distinct physical characteristics, including darker or bluish skin, symbolizing their cosmic origin. However, these representations have frequently been reinterpreted by mainstream archaeologists as mere artistic conventions, devoid of literal meaning. The Anunnaki are believed to have directly ruled humanity for millennia, being worshipped as gods, but also feared for their power and temperament. The Sumerians described these beings as possessing advanced technologies, including weapons of mass destruction. Marduk, for example, is described as a chamber atop a ziggurat where the god could thunder like Adad, a possible reference to some kind of energy device or weapon. Particularly interesting is the description of the War of the Gods, armed conflicts between factions of the Anunnaki that, according to the texts, caused destruction on a catastrophic scale. Some of these narratives mention the use of weapons capable of making the earth tremble, turning day into night, and causing mass deaths, descriptions that unsettlingly recall the effects of modern nuclear weapons. The big question is, why were these highly detailed and specific narratives progressively marginalized in the official history of humanity? Why was the Sumerian pantheon, with its complex network of interrelated deities, gradually replaced by increasingly simplified religious systems, culminating in the strict monotheism we know today? One theory suggests that as the Anunnaki began to leave Earth, or significantly reduced their physical presence, human elites took control, gradually altering religious narratives to consolidate their own power. Real gods were replaced by abstractions, and direct knowledge by dogma and faith. If these ancient narratives contain literal truths about our origin and history, then our entire understanding of human evolution and the development of civilization needs to be rethought. Leave the word Anunnaki in the comments if you believe there is more to these ancient stories than just myths and legends. When we delve into the ancient scriptures that formed the basis of today's major monotheistic religions, we find surprising references to these primordial deities. References that have been systematically obscured, mistranslated, or reinterpreted to fit a new theological narrative. Let's take the Bible as an example. In Genesis 6:4 we read, "There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." This enigmatic verse refers to the Nephilim, a term derived from the Hebrew Nephal, meaning those who fell, or the fallen ones. Who were these sons of God who united with the daughters of humans? Traditional interpretation suggests they were fallen angels, but a deeper analysis of the original Hebrew text reveals something far more complex. The Hebrew term used here, B'nai ha-Elohim, literally sons of the gods or sons of the deities, is plural. More importantly, at no point does the original text describe them as angels. This was a later interpretation, an attempt to reconcile these ancient deities with the emerging monotheistic paradigm. In reality, the text seems to describe physical beings who had sexual relations with humans, producing hybrid offspring, the Gibborim, translated as men of renown or heroes of antiquity. In the Book of Enoch, a Jewish apocryphal text that was excluded from the biblical canon but was widely respected in ancient Jewish and early Christian communities, we find much more detailed descriptions of these beings. Enoch speaks of 200 watchers or sentinels who descended to Mount Hermon and mingled with humans. They are described as teaching humans metallurgy, cosmetics, sorcery, astrology, and other advanced sciences, a remarkable echo of Sumerian narratives about the Anunnaki. In the Old Testament, we find repeated references to deities such as Baal, Moloch, Dagon, and Ashtoreth, often presented as false gods or idols. However, contemporary Ugaritic and Phoenician texts from those times describe these entities as real and powerful beings, not mere human inventions. The systematic demonization of these deities coincided with the rise of the exclusive cult of Yahweh, who was originally only a local deity, possibly associated with volcanoes and storms in the Canaanite pantheon. Texts from the Gnostic tradition, especially those discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, provide a radically different perspective. In texts such as the Apocryphon of John and the Hypostasis of the Archons, we find descriptions of beings called archons, cosmic rulers led by an entity called Yaldabaoth, often identified with the God of the Old Testament. According to these texts, the archons are imperfect creators who keep humanity in a state of spiritual ignorance. In ancient Egypt, deities such as Osiris, Isis, and Horus were progressively transformed and absorbed by emerging Christianity. The iconography of Isis nursing Horus formed the basis for later representations of the Virgin Mary with the infant Jesus. The black statues of the Black Virgin found in cathedrals throughout Europe are possibly relics of this transition, maintaining the original association with the dark or black skin of cosmic deities. The Vedic texts of India speak extensively of Vimanas, flying vehicles used by the gods in their celestial wars. The Mahabharata contains descriptions of weapons of mass destruction, including the Brahmastra, capable of annihilating entire armies and leaving the affected areas uninhabitable, a description that unsettlingly recalls the effects of nuclear radiation. In Native American cultures, we find narratives about Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of the Aztecs, or Viracocha of the Incas, deities described as having different skin, generally lighter, and who came from the sky to bring knowledge and civilization. These entities promised to return one day, a prophecy that ironically facilitated the Spanish conquest, when Hernán Cortés was initially mistaken for the return of Quetzalcoatl. What all these traditions have in common is the gradual transformation of physical, tangible deities, with complex motives and conflicts, into spiritual abstractions or metaphorical symbols. This transformation was not accidental, but part of a larger process of social and political control, where priestly elites assumed the role of exclusive intermediaries between humanity and the divine. Translations of ancient scriptures often obscure these connections. For example, in the King James Bible, the term Rephaim is translated as dead or spirits of the dead, but in the original Hebrew, it refers to a specific race of giants who inhabited Canaan. Similarly, terms like cherubim and seraphim are typically visualized as ethereal winged angels. But in the original descriptions, they are complex physical beings, sometimes with animal characteristics combined with humanoid forms. Again, echoing representations of deities in older cultures. What we are seeing, therefore, is not merely natural religious evolution, but a deliberate rewriting of humanity's spiritual history, a systematic erasure of the original Black Lords in favor of a more controllable and homogenized spiritual paradigm. If these ancient deities truly existed as physical beings, as a literal reading of the oldest texts suggests, then our entire understanding of human history needs to be reconsidered. Leave the word scriptures in the comments if you see these connections between ancient deities and the religious texts that shaped our current world. One of the most fascinating phenomena in the history of human spirituality is the gradual transformation of ancient, physical, tangible gods into abstract concepts, angels, demons, or, in many cases, their complete elimination from the historical record. This transformation was not a natural process of spiritual evolution, as is often suggested, but a deliberate rewriting of history to serve new power systems. When we examine ancient cultures such as Sumerian, Egyptian, or Vedic, we find complex pantheons of interconnected deities, each with specific domains of influence, distinct personalities, and, most importantly, a concrete physical presence in the human world. These deities were not worshipped from a distance or through abstract faith. They supposedly lived in specific temples, interacted directly with their worshippers, had physical needs such as food, hence the sacrifices and offerings, and even maintained sexual relationships with humans. The transition from this model to the abstract monotheism we know today occurred in stages. In ancient Egypt, we see one of the first experiments in religious centralization during the reign of Akhenaten. approximately 1353-1336 BC, who attempted to replace the traditional Egyptian pantheon with the exclusive worship of Aten, the solar disk. This religious reform, although it lasted only a generation, established an important precedent. In the case of Judeo-Christian traditions, the transformation was even more deliberate. The God of Israel was not originally presented as the only existing God, but as the particular God of a specific tribe. The first commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me," does not deny the existence of other deities. It only prohibits their worship. It is only in later periods that Yahweh is elevated to the position of the only true God, with all other deities reclassified as false, as demons, or as subordinate aspects, angels, of the main deity. This process of reclassification is particularly evident in the treatment of female deities. Powerful goddesses like Asherah, whom archaeological evidence suggests was originally venerated as the consort of Yahweh, were systematically eliminated from official records. Inanna Ishtar, the powerful Sumerian, Babylonian goddess of war and sexuality, was fragmented and demonized, with aspects of her personality distributed among figures like Lilith, demonized, or the Virgin Mary, purified of any sexuality. In the process of Christianizing Europe, local deities were frequently transformed into Christian saints, retaining their characteristics and festivities, but now under a new theological context. The Celtic goddess Brigid became Saint Brigid. Thor, the Norse god of thunder, saw many of his attributes transferred to Saint Olaf. The Yoruba goddess Osun was syncretized with Our Lady of the Conception in Brazilian candomblé. The deities associated with darkness or the underworld underwent an even more radical transformation. Chthonic gods such as Hades, Anubis, or Mictlantecutli, originally complex and morally ambivalent deities responsible for necessary domains such as death and regeneration, were progressively demonized. Their representations with dark or black skin, originally symbolizing their connection to fertile soil or the starry night sky, were reinterpreted as signs of malevolence. This process of demonization reached its peak in the European Middle Ages, when ancient pagan gods like Pan, with his horns and goat legs, symbols of fertility and connection with nature, were transformed into the image of the Christian devil himself. Female deities associated with wisdom, sexuality, and natural magic were reclassified as witches, leading to centuries of persecution and the near-complete erasure of female spiritual traditions in Europe. The impact of this transformation goes far beyond abstract theology. By converting physical, tangible deities into spiritual abstractions, accessible only through authorized intermediaries, priests, the emerging religious elites consolidated unprecedented power, simultaneously, by demonizing aspects of divinity associated with the body, sexuality, nature, and darkness. A system of control was created that alienated human beings from fundamental aspects of their own experience. More subtle, but equally profound, was the transformation in the human relationship with the divine. In the oldest traditions, the gods were seen as integral parts of the natural world, powerful but limited entities with whom humans could negotiate, argue, and even challenge. See the stories of Jacob wrestling with the angel, or Gilgamesh challenging Ishtar. With the advent of absolute monotheism, this relationship transformed into total submission to a perfect, omnipotent, and infallible entity. The central question we must ask ourselves is, what have we lost in this transition? What wisdom, what connections, what human potential has been sacrificed on the altar of religious uniformity? And more importantly, was this process guided by authentic spiritual evolution or by political motivations of control and power? The primordial deities, the dark lords of the sky, may never have truly disappeared. They were masked, reclassified, fragmented into categories more acceptable to the new paradigm. But the archetypes they represent, moral complexity, direct connection to the cosmos, integration of the light and dark aspects of existence, remain deeply rooted in the human collective unconscious, waiting to be rediscovered. Type transformation in the comments if you can see how this rewriting of spiritual history continues to influence our culture and thinking to this day. When we speak of the Dark Lords of the Sky, we are not dealing only with ancient texts or oral traditions. There is physical evidence, archaeological artifacts that defy conventional explanations and seem to corroborate these ancestral narratives. Let's examine some of the most intriguing findings and what they might reveal about these primordial deities. Let's begin with the mysterious objects known as the Dropa stones. Discovered in 1938 in the Bayan Kara Ula Mountains on the border between China and Tibet, these 716 disc-shaped stones contain microscopic double spirals engraved with what appear to be inscriptions. According to some controversial analyses, these inscriptions tell the story of a race of beings who descended from the clouds approximately 12,000 years ago. Most interestingly, excavations in the same region have revealed skeletons of humanoids with disproportionately large skulls and small bodies. Conventional science tends to ignore these findings, but they persist as unsolved enigmas. In Mesopotamia, the cradle of Sumerian civilization, we find numerous cylinder seals, small cylindrical artifacts covered in engravings that, when rolled on clay, produced detailed images. Many of these cylinder seals contain representations of what the Sumerians called mushusu, divine aircraft in which the Anunnaki traveled. The most famous, known as Seal VA-243 in the Berlin State Museum, appears to show a surprisingly accurate representation of the solar system, including all known planets in their correct positions, plus one additional planet, possibly Nibiru, the supposed planet of origin of the Anunnaki. How could the Sumerians have possessed this advanced astronomical knowledge without telescopes? Ancient Egypt presents us with numerous enigmatic artifacts. In Abydos, at the Temple of Seti the Mer, we find hieroglyphs that appear to represent helicopters, submarines, and advanced aircraft, the famous Abydos hieroglyphs. Conventional archaeologists argue that these are palimpsests, superimpositions of different inscriptions creating coincident images, but the precision of the details remains impressive. Still in Egypt, we have evidence of advanced technologies in operation. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built with mathematical precision impossible to replicate even with modern tools, perfectly aligned with cardinal points and specific constellations, remains an architectural enigma. How can we explain that stone blocks weighing tons were cut with millimeter precision and transported for kilometers without the use of wheels or modern machines? In South America, particularly in Peru, we find the intriguing elongated skulls of paracas. While artificial cranial deformation was a common practice in many ancient cultures, the paracas' skulls exhibit anomalies that go beyond simple modification. DNA analyses performed on some of these specimens have revealed non-human genetic material and unexplained anatomical features, such as increased brain volume and the absence of normal cranial sutures. In Pumapunku, Bolivia, part of the Tiahuanaco complex, we find stone blocks cut with precision impossible for the tools supposedly available at the time. Some of these blocks contain perfectly cylindrical perforations and exact 90-degree angles, features that would require industrial precision tools. Global megalithic architecture, from Stonehenge in the UK to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dated approximately 12,000 years ago, much earlier than previously believed possible for constructions of this scale, suggests architectural and astronomical knowledge that contradicts the conventional narrative of human development. Particularly intriguing are the artifacts that appear to represent or document beings other than humans. In caves in France, Spain, and Australia, cave paintings tens of thousands of years old show humanoids in suits resembling modern astronauts, with helmets and what appear to be breathing tubes. In California, cave paintings by the Chumash Indians depict beings they called salamanders, described as visitors who came from the sky in flying canoes. In Japan, the mysterious Doge figurines dating from the Jomon period, 14,300 BC, depict beings with what appear to be helmets and spacesuits, complete with visors and breathing apparatus. In Mexico, Olmec statues show beings with distinct facial features, flat noses, thick lips, and almond-shaped eyes, very different from the local population, in addition to the famous colossal heads that seem to represent individuals of African origin, long before any known contact between these continents. Official archaeology tends to ignore, minimize, or reinterpret these findings to fit them into the accepted paradigm of isolated human evolution without external interference. Artifacts that do not fit this narrative are often archived in museum basements, uncatalogued, or even mysteriously disappear after their initial discovery. The famous Baghdad Battery, A ceramic jar containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod, dating from approximately 250 BC, is capable of generating electricity when filled with acid, a technology supposedly unavailable at the time. Similarly, the Egyptian lamps depicted in the reliefs of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera show what appear to be electrical lighting devices, including what resemble cables and bulbs. What all this archaeological evidence has in common is that it challenges the accepted paradigm of isolated and linear human evolution. It suggests that, in ancient times, human cultures had access to advanced knowledge and technologies, possibly provided by these primordial deities, these dark lords of the sky described in so many ancient traditions. The fundamental question is not whether these artifacts exist. They are well documented, but how to interpret them. Conventional archaeology insists on explanations that fit the established paradigm, while alternative researchers see in these pieces tangible evidence that human history may be far more complex and fascinating than we have been taught. Share the word artifacts in the comments if you believe that conventional archaeology is ignoring important evidence that could revolutionize our understanding of the human past. The association of primordial deities with the sky, particularly the night sky and stars, is a universal element in mythologies worldwide. This cross-cultural consistency suggests something deeper than mere coincidence or psychological projection, perhaps a record of real experiences with beings of celestial origin. When the ancient Sumerians wrote about the Anunnaki descending in celestial boats, when the Egyptians depicted the Neteru traveling in solar boats, when Vedic texts detailed the vimanas that transported the gods, they were possibly documenting advanced technology literally, not metaphorically. The universal fascination with the heavens and the belief that deities inhabited the stars may be echoes of an ancestral knowledge about our true cosmic origin. Ancient astronomy, far more advanced than we might expect from primitive civilizations, provides further clues. The Sumerians knew of distant planets, including Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, invisible to the naked eye, and officially discovered only in the modern era with advanced telescopes. The Maya calculated astronomical cycles with impressive mathematical precision. The builders of Stonehenge, Karnak, the Nazca Lines, and countless other astronomically aligned monuments demonstrated a sophisticated celestial knowledge that defies conventional explanations. Significantly, many cultures point to specific constellations as the origin of these deities. The Dogon of Mali maintain detailed traditions about beings from Sirius B, a white dwarf invisible to the naked eye, discovered by modern astronomy only in 1862, who transmitted astronomical knowledge to them. The Incas, Mayans, and Hopi refer to the star brothers of the Pleiades. Cultures of Oceania speak of deities from Orion. This celestial connection had physical expression in the ancient concept of axis mundi, the axis of the world connecting heaven, earth, and the underworld. The Egyptian pyramids, the Mesopotamian ziggurats, the Mayan and Inca temples, and even the Gothic cathedrals were built as points of contact between the earthly and celestial realms, literally gateways to the stars. Descriptions of the Black Lords often emphasize their association with the night sky, the dark cosmos dotted with stars. The color black in this context did not represent evil or negativity, later associations imposed during Christianization, but the vastness of outer space, the primordial void from which all creation emerges. Deities such as Kali in India, Nuit in Egypt, or Quetzalcoatl among the Aztecs were depicted with black or dark blue skin, symbolizing this cosmic connection. Fascinatingly, modern science has begun to acknowledge the possibility of directed panspermia, the hypothesis that life on Earth may have been deliberately seeded by advanced extraterrestrial civilizations. Renowned astrophysicist Fred Hoyle proposed that certain evolutionary developments on Earth may have been accelerated by external interventions. The basic building blocks of life, amino acids, nucleotides, are found in abundance in space, and recent discoveries of habitable exoplanets have made the possibility of extraterrestrial life a serious scientific question, not mere speculation. When ancient narratives describe wars between gods in the heavens, are they recording real conflicts witnessed in antiquity? The Vedic texts, for example, detail aerial battles with vimanas using weapons of mass destruction. The Book of Enoch describes a war in the heavens that resulted in the fall of the Watchers. These may be records of real events preserved through millennia as myths. The modern tendency to interpret these accounts as metaphors or allegory may be a fundamental error, an inability to accept what our ancestors were trying to tell us literally, that advanced beings from the sky visited Earth, interacted with humans, transmitted knowledge and technologies, and eventually withdrew, promising to return one day. This supposed return is another recurring element in world traditions. The Aztecs awaited the return of Quetzalcoatl, the Incas that of Viracocha. The Hindus await Kalki, the 10th avatar of Vishnu. The Buddhists await Maitreya. The Zoroastrians, Saoshyant. The Christians, the return of Christ. The Muslims, the Mahdi. This universal expectation may be another echo of a real promise made by these celestial lords before their departure. The ancients were not superstitious fools projecting fantasies onto the heavens. They were meticulous observers who recorded what they witnessed. Relegating their narratives to the category of myth may be the greatest interpretive error in human history. In African cultures, the Milky Way was often called the Road of the Gods, the path by which deities traveled to visit Earth. In ancient Egypt, the constellation Orion was associated with Osiris, and pyramids were aligned precisely to reflect this constellation on Earth. The Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece possibly preserved secret knowledge about the celestial origin of humanity, transmitted only to initiates after solemn oaths of silence. Perhaps the deepest truth is that we are all descendants of these cosmic deities, not just metaphorically or spiritually, but literally, genetically. Ancient texts that speak of gods creating man in their image, or of sons of gods who united with daughters of men, may be documenting a literal biological truth, the partially extraterrestrial origin of modern Homo sapiens. If you believe that our ancestors were recording real experiences with advanced celestial beings, and not just inventing stories to explain natural phenomena, type heavens in the comments. One of the most radical and consequential transformations in human history was the transition from complex polytheistic systems with their multiple interconnected deities to the strict monotheism that today dominates much of global religious thought. This change was not merely theological, but represented a profound reconfiguration of political, social, and economic power, a veritable conspiracy to control humanity's spiritual narrative. To understand the magnitude of this transformation, we must first recognize that ancient polytheism was not simply a collection of primitive superstitions, but a sophisticated system that acknowledged the complexity of the cosmos. The multiple deities represented the diverse natural, cosmic, and psychological forces that shape human experience. More importantly, this system often preserved memories of actual contact with the Dark Lords of the sky, the advanced beings who interacted with early humanity. The monotheistic conspiracy began gradually. In Egypt, we see one of the first experiments with Pharaoh Akhenaten, who attempted to replace the Egyptian pantheon with the exclusive worship of Aten, the solar disk. This religious reform coincided with an unprecedented centralization of power in the hands of the pharaoh. Although this experiment lasted only a generation, it established a significant precedent. Hebrew monotheism emerged later, not as a completely new system, but as an evolution of henotheism, the worship of a principal god within a context that recognized the existence of other gods. Yahweh, originally a local deity possibly associated with volcanoes and storms, was initially presented not as the only existing god, but as the specific God of Israel, more powerful than the deities of other peoples. The first commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me," does not deny the existence of other deities. It only prohibits their worship. The transition to strict monotheism occurred primarily during the Babylonian exile, 586-539 BC, when the Jewish priestly elites, faced with the loss of their temple and lands, reformulated their theology to preserve their cultural identity. This reformulation coincided with the need to consolidate priestly power, resulting in a theology that positioned priests as the exclusive intermediaries between the people and the now single true deity. With the rise of Christianity and later Islam, strict monotheism spread globally, often through coercion and violence. The result was the near-complete erasure of polytheistic traditions that preserved memories of the original Black Lords. Deities that were once recognized as physical, tangible beings with specific motivations and limitations were transformed into metaphysical abstractions or simply eradicated from the historical record. This transformation served clear political interests. Unlike polytheistic systems, where multiple deities offered multiple paths to the divine, strict monotheism created a funnel of power, where access to the one true deity was controlled by a specific priestly hierarchy. Kings and emperors who adopted these new religions gained unprecedented tools to control populations through the concept of exclusive divine mandate. The subjugation of women was another direct result of this transition. The ancient female deities, Inanna, Isis, Asherah, Kali, Freya, and countless others, represented female power in all its manifestations, from sexuality to war, from healing to destruction. With their elimination or subordination, female spirituality was systematically suppressed, contributing to millennia of gender inequality. The demonization of knowledge was particularly significant. In polytheistic traditions, deities such as Thoth, Enki, or Prometheus were celebrated for bringing knowledge to humanity. In the new monotheistic paradigm, the pursuit of independent knowledge often became suspect or heretical. See the myth of the fall in Eden, where original sin is directly linked to the acquisition of knowledge. This attitude contributed to centuries of scientific stagnation during the European Middle Ages. Even more insidious was the fragmentation of human consciousness. Strict monotheism divided the cosmos into rigid dualities: good versus evil, spirit versus matter, man versus nature, in contrast to the more integrated vision of polytheistic traditions. This fragmentation alienated human beings from essential aspects of their own experience and of the natural world. The Gnostic movements of the early centuries AD represented one of the most significant resistances to this conspiracy. The Gnostics maintained that the God of the Old Testament was not the true supreme divine being, but an imperfect creator, the demiurge, who kept humanity in spiritual ignorance. This perspective, which echoed ancient memories of the original Dark Lords, was violently suppressed by the emerging Orthodox Christianity, with Gnostic texts destroyed en masse and their followers persecuted as heretics. During the forced Christianization of Europe, America, and eventually parts of Africa and Asia, countless temples were destroyed, libraries burned, and practitioners of ancient religions executed. The knowledge preserved in these traditions, often including memories of the original Black Masters, was almost completely lost. What survived did so through syncretism, clandestine oral traditions, and codification in Hermetic symbolism. The Inquisition, the Crusades, the conquest of the Americas, and other episodes of religious violence were not merely theological conflicts, but deliberate campaigns to eradicate evidence and memories of the original deities. The burning of Mayan codices by Diego de Landa, the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, the persecution of Vodou practitioners in Haiti, all these episodes contributed to the same goal: the systematic erasure of our true spiritual history. In the modern world, this conspiracy continues through more subtle mechanisms. Conventional academia ridicules literal interpretations of ancient texts, insisting that our ancestors were simpletons creating fantasies to explain natural phenomena they did not understand. A deeply condescending stance that ignores the sophistication demonstrated by these cultures in astronomy, mathematics, engineering, and other fields. The real question we must ask ourselves is, who benefits from this historical erasure? Why have so many resources and efforts been invested over millennia to replace the memory of the original Black Masters with a single abstract God, accessible only through authorized intermediaries? The answer may lie in a power dynamic that continues to shape our civilization to this day. Write the word conspiracy in the comments if you perceive how this systematic erasure has shaped our understanding of history and spirituality. Throughout history, religious and spiritual texts have been rigorously controlled by political and religious authorities. Those that did not conform to the official narrative were systematically suppressed, destroyed, or marginalized as apocryphal, heretical, or demonic. These forbidden texts, many of which survived only through extraordinary historical chance, often contain crucial clues about the Dark Lords of Heaven and their influence on human history. One of the most notable examples is the Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text that was excluded from the biblical canon but was widely respected in Second Temple Jewish communities and early Christian communities. This text, rediscovered in its entirety only in the 18th century in Ethiopia, where the Ethiopian Orthodox Church maintained it as a canonical text, contains detailed accounts of the Watchers, 200 angelic beings who descended to Mount Hermon, took human wives, and taught humans forbidden sciences. The Book of Enoch describes how these Watchers taught humans metallurgy, cosmetics, sorcery, astrology, meteorology, and other advanced sciences. Most significantly, it details how these beings produced hybrid offspring with human women, the Nephilim, described as giants who devastated the earth with their violence and insatiable appetite. According to the text, it was this corruption that led to the flood, sent to eliminate this hybrid lineage. Why was a text so central to understanding ancient Jewish and Christian cosmology excluded from the canon? The conventional answer suggests theological concerns with its descriptions of angels falling into sin. But a more critical analysis reveals that the Book of Enoch preserves inconvenient memories of the original Dark Lords, not as ethereal angels, but as physical, technologically advanced beings who directly interfered in human development. Another crucial set of texts are the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, a collection of Gnostic texts discovered in Egypt in 1945. These texts, hidden in ceramic jars around the 4th century AD to protect them from destruction ordered by the Church, present a cosmology radically different from Christian orthodoxy. In texts such as the Apocryphon of John and the Hypostasis of the Archons, we find descriptions of the Archons, cosmic rulers led by an entity called Yaldabaoth, often identified with the God of the Old Testament, who created the physical world as a prison to keep humanity ignorant of its true divine nature. These Archons are described as having hybrid animal-human characteristics and exercising control over the material world. This Gnostic vision, which was systematically persecuted and almost completely eradicated by Orthodox Christianity, preserves echoes of the original Black Lords, not as deities to be worshipped, but as limited beings who, for their own reasons, manipulated human and spiritual development. The Hermetic texts attributed to the legendary Hermes Trismegistus represent another tradition that preserved hidden knowledge. Documents such as the Corpus Hermeticum and the Emerald Tablet contain esoteric teachings encoded in symbolic language, possibly preserving knowledge transmitted by the original Dark Lords. The famous Hermetic principle, as above, so below, may be a coded reference to the connection between the celestial and terrestrial realms, the domains of gods and humans. In the Far East, texts such as the Leng Shu, mentioned in H.P. Lovecraft's Necronomicon, a fictional work but possibly inspired by real traditions, supposedly contain teachings about those who came before, ancient cosmic entities that influenced the development of Earth. Although the Leng Shu, as described by Lovecraft, is fictional, there are ancient Tibetan and Chinese traditions about beings called Lords of Heaven, or celestial emperors, who brought knowledge to humanity. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered between 1947 and 1956 in caves near the Dead Sea, provide another window into alternative Jewish traditions. Texts such as the War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness and fragments of the Book of Giants, an expansion of the Enoch narrative, contain further references to celestial beings who interfered in human development. Esoteric traditions later codified in alchemical and Rosicrucian texts preserved fragments of this ancient knowledge through allegory and symbolism. The alchemical concept of prime matter, the primordial substance containing all potential, may be a coded reference to the genetic manipulation performed by the original Dark Lords to create modern humanity. The oral traditions of indigenous peoples around the world, many of which are only now being recorded, contain numerous references to beings who came from the stars to teach and influence humanity. Because these traditions were not written down, they often escape the systematic censorship imposed on written texts, preserving more direct memories of the original Black Masters. In the Middle East, Yazidi texts, a religious minority in Iraq often persecuted for their alleged devil worship, contain accounts of the peacock angel, a primordial deity who refused to bow down to man when ordered by God. This narrative, often misinterpreted as satanic worship by outside observers, preserves memories of older deities that preceded the monotheistic God. What all these forbidden and marginalized texts have in common is that they offer glimpses into a far more complex and unsettling spiritual history than the official narrative allows us to know. They suggest that advanced entities, the Dark Lords of Heaven, interacted directly with early humanity, shaping our genetic, cultural, and spiritual development for reasons that may not have been entirely benevolent. The systematic suppression of these texts was neither accidental nor arbitrary. It was part of a coordinated effort to eliminate inconvenient memories of our true origins, to replace direct knowledge with dogma and blind faith, and to centralize spiritual power in the hands of priestly elites who claimed exclusive authority over access to the divine. The fact that so many of these texts have survived, often due to extraordinary circumstances, suggests perhaps a deliberate intention on the part of secret guardians of this ancient knowledge, individuals and groups who, throughout the centuries, risked their lives to preserve truths that the ruling authorities tried to eradicate. Write "forbidden" in the comments if you believe these marginalized texts contain crucial truths that have been deliberately suppressed from official history. The primordial deities, the Dark Lords of the sky, did not simply disappear from human history. They were masked, reclassified, and in some cases continue to interact with humanity in new forms. In the contemporary world, we find multiple manifestations that suggest the continuity of this ancestral influence. The UFO/UAP, unidentified flying objects, unidentified aerial phenomenon possibly represents the most direct manifestation. From the famous Roswell incident in 1947, through the waves of sightings in the 1950s and 60s, to the recent official admissions by the Pentagon of the reality of these phenomena, we are witnessing what may be only the most recent phase of a millennia-old interaction. Significantly, accounts of encounters with extraterrestrials often describe beings with characteristics strikingly similar to ancient deities: telepathic abilities, the ability to manipulate time and space, and a special interest in human genetics and reproduction. The so-called greys, gray beings with large black eyes, frequently reported in abductions, share remarkable similarities with ancient representations of deities such as the Nomos of the Dogon people of Mali. The modern obsession with genetic engineering and gene editing can be seen as a rediscovery of knowledge that the original Black Masters possessed and applied in the creation of modern Homo sapiens. When contemporary scientists manipulate DNA in laboratories, they are essentially replicating, on a much more limited scale, what ancient narratives describe as the creation of humanity by the gods. The concept of artificial intelligence also echoes ancient narratives about creation. We are currently in the process of creating non-human, potentially conscious intelligences to serve us, a remarkable inversion of what ancient texts describe, where advanced deities created humans to serve them. This symmetry suggests a cyclical pattern in the evolution of consciousness, where the created eventually becomes the creator. On a broader cultural level, the persistence of archetypes associated with the Dark Masters is evident in film, literature, and art. Modern science fiction, from 2001, A Space Odyssey to Prometheus, repeatedly explores the theme of advanced beings shaping human evolution. These are not mere fantasies, but intuitions of an ancestral truth emerging in the collective unconscious. The growing acceptance of the directed panspermia hypothesis in the scientific community, the idea that life on Earth may have been deliberately seeded by advanced extraterrestrial civilizations, represents a gradual convergence between modern science and ancient narratives about divine creation. Renowned scientists such as Francis Crick, co-discoverer of the structure of DNA, have seriously suggested this possibility. In the spiritual realm, the resurgence of shamanic traditions and the use of psychedelic plants such as ayahuasca, peyote, and psilocybin often result in encounters with entities that users describe as interdimensional beings or cosmic teachers. These experiences remarkably echo ancestral encounters with the original Black Lords, suggesting that these beings may inhabit dimensions of reality normally inaccessible to ordinary human consciousness. The emerging field of archaeoacoustics, the study of the acoustic properties of ancient archaeological sites, has revealed that many temples and sacred chambers were deliberately constructed to amplify specific frequencies that can alter human consciousness. This discovery suggests that consciousness-altering technologies, possibly taught by the original Dark Lords, were integrated into the sacred architecture itself. The persistence of secret societies and esoteric orders such as the Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and various Hermetic orders suggests the continuity of traditions that preserve ancient knowledge about our true origins. The rituals, symbols, and teachings of these orders often contain coded references to the original Dark Lords and their role in human history. On a more disturbing level, reports from government programs classified as the alleged Montauk Project and MK-Ultra suggest experimentation with advanced consciousness manipulation technologies, possibly derived from knowledge acquired through contact with non-human intelligences. These claims, while controversial, echo ancient narratives about forbidden knowledge transmitted by the Black Masters. The global phenomenon of crop circles, especially the more complex examples that demonstrate advanced knowledge of mathematics, physics, and astronomy, may represent a contemporary form of communication from these ancient intelligences. The geometric sophistication and mathematical precision of the most complex designs defy conventional explanations. The internet and the emerging digital noosphere, a global network of interconnected consciousness, may represent an evolutionary stage foreseen and perhaps facilitated by the original Black Masters. The ability to instantly share knowledge around the globe is catalyzing an accelerated evolution of human collective consciousness, potentially preparing us for a new level of interaction with these ancestral intelligences. Global reports of men in black, enigmatic figures who supposedly appear to silence witnesses of UFO phenomena, echo ancient narratives about guardians or sentinels associated with the gods, tasked with limiting human access to forbidden knowledge. Perhaps most significant is the gradual collapse of the materialist paradigm that has dominated Western thought in recent centuries. Quantum physics, with its implications for the nature of consciousness and reality, is revalidating aspects of ancient cosmologies that were dismissed as superstitious by Newtonian science. The growing acceptance that consciousness may be fundamental, not emergent, in the universe echoes ancestral views that the Black Masters supposedly taught. We are potentially on the threshold of a new chapter in the long history of interaction between humanity and the Dark Lords of the sky. The barriers between science and spirituality are dissolving, and ancient truths, so long suppressed, are emerging into the collective consciousness. What has been hidden is being revealed. Write manifestation in the comments if you perceive these echoes of the Black Masters in the contemporary world and believe that we are approaching a new phase of revelation. Throughout this exploration of the Dark Lords of the sky, we traverse textual, archaeological, and cultural evidence that suggests a far more complex and fascinating human history than conventional narrative allows us to know. But beyond historical investigation, there is a deeper, more personal dimension to this journey, the potential awakening of a dormant consciousness within each of us. Ancient Gnostic traditions spoke of divine sparks trapped in physical bodies, fragments of the original cosmic consciousness that were separated and forgot their true nature. Hermetic texts taught, "Know thyself, and thou shalt know the universe and the gods." These traditions suggested that true knowledge, gnosis, was not merely intellectual, but a direct and experiential revelation of our true nature and origin. If, as ancient texts suggest, modern humans were created through the genetic intervention of the Dark Lords of Heaven, then we literally carry their DNA in our cells. This is not merely a spiritual metaphor, but a potential biological reality. The gods are not simply out there in the cosmos. Aspects of them are encoded in our very genetic makeup, waiting to be activated. The so-called junk DNA, extensive portions of our genome that do not code for proteins and whose function remains mysterious to conventional science, may contain dormant information, genetic programs placed by our creators to be activated at specific moments in our evolution. The remarkable increase in the cranial capacity of Homo sapiens, which occurred without a clear evolutionary explanation, may have been just the first of many programmed evolutionary leaps. The mystical and spiritual experiences reported by people of all cultures and eras, feelings of cosmic unity, expanded perception, telepathic communication, out-of-body experiences, may be glimpses of latent capabilities, manifestations of our divine genetic heritage emerging into consciousness. Ancient texts often describe gods with precisely these capabilities, not as supernatural powers, but as natural abilities of more advanced beings. The esoteric tradition of the body of light, or immortal body, found in Taoism, Hermeticism, spiritual alchemy, and Tibetan practices, suggests the possibility of transforming the physical vehicle by activating higher aspects of our genetic potential. These practices, which have survived marginally throughout human history, may be preserved fragments of consciousness technologies originally taught by the Dark Lords. Interestingly, experiences with psychedelic substances often result in encounters with entities that communicate information about DNA and genetic evolution. Participants in ayahuasca rituals, for example, regularly report visions of intertwined serpents, reminiscent of DNA structure, and messages about the activation of dormant potentials. These experiences, universal among shamanic cultures globally, may represent a method developed to facilitate direct communication with aspects of the consciousness of the Black Masters encoded within our own being. The emerging scientific understanding of epigenetics, the study of how genes can be activated or deactivated without altering the DNA sequence, provides a potential mechanism for this awakening. Environmental factors, including sound frequencies, electromagnetic fields, meditative practices, and even conscious mental attitude, can influence which genes are expressed. Ancient spiritual practices that have survived in esoteric traditions may be precisely technologies for activating specific aspects of our hidden genetic potential. Many contemporary researchers note the apparent acceleration of human consciousness in recent decades. Increases in empathy, intuitive perception, ecological awareness, and systems thinking. Newly born children often demonstrate extraordinary cognitive and intuitive abilities, the so-called indigo or crystal children. These observations suggest that a process of genetic activation may be occurring globally, perhaps a coded evolutionary program reaching its moment of expression. The growing preoccupation with ascension, consciousness evolution, and spiritual awakening in contemporary esoteric communities may reflect a collective intuition of this larger process. The prophecies of many native traditions, from the Hopi to the Maya, from Australian Aborigines to the Kogi of Colombia, converge on the idea that we are entering a new era of expanded consciousness, often associated with the return or revelation of ancestral deities. The resistance of established power structures to this awakening is understandable. Dominant religious, political, and economic institutions derive their authority precisely from the artificial separation between humans and the divine, from the paradigm of scarcity and limitation, from the fragmentation of consciousness that keeps us identified with separate, competing personalities. The awakening of the divine genetic potential in ordinary human beings represents a fundamental threat to these systems of control. Several researchers suggest that the electromagnetic frequencies permeating the modern environment, certain food additives and environmental chemicals appear specifically designed to suppress aspects of brain function associated with expanded perception and transpersonal connection. These observations suggest an ongoing battle for control of our gene expression and evolutionary potential. On an individual level, the invitation is clear: to actively seek the awakening of higher consciousness through practices that activate our dormant potential. Meditation, conscious breathing, somatic movement, contact with nature, spontaneous creativity, authentic community. These simple practices create conditions for higher aspects of our DNA to express themselves. At a collective level, we are possibly witnessing the initial stages of an evolutionary transformation foreseen and programmed millennia ago. The internet, connecting minds globally in real time, may be the nervous system of an emerging planetary organism. Current ecological, social, and political crises may be the birth pangs of a new expression of human consciousness. The Dark Lords of the sky may never have truly departed. Aspects of their advanced consciousness remain encoded in our own genetic makeup, awaiting the opportune moment to awaken. The promise of return, found in so many traditions, may refer not to a physical arrival of spaceships, but to the inner awakening of their genetic legacy within each of us. The true revolution lies not in the intellectual recognition of an alternative history, however fascinating it may be, but in the direct experience of our expanded potential, in the conscious activation of the divine capacities that lie dormant in our own biological makeup. We are not merely discovering the truth about ancestral gods. We are becoming what we were always meant to be. Share the word awakening in the comments if you feel something profound is activating in your own consciousness, a distant but unmistakable echo of our cosmic creators, the Dark Lords of Heaven. We have reached the end of this fascinating journey through the true history of the deities that preceded the one God. If you have watched this far, you are part of a minority that has the courage to question the official narrative and seek deeper truths about our origin. This is just the beginning of a much greater awakening. If this content resonated with you, If you felt that spark of recognition, that feeling that something profound is being revealed, please subscribe to the channel right now. We are building a community of truth seekers, people who are not afraid to look beyond the veil of official history. Leave the word Anunnaki in the comments so I know you are awake and connected to this ancestral knowledge. Your comment not only helps the algorithm show this video to more people ready to awaken, but also connects us as a community of evolving consciousnesses. Give us a like to show your support for this type of content that platforms often try to suppress. Each like is a statement that you value the truth, no matter how challenging it may be. And don't forget to watch the next video that will appear on the screen in a few seconds, where we will delve even deeper into the mysteries of the forbidden texts that religious authorities don't want you to know. The truth will not only set us free, it will reveal our divine potential.